The afternoon sun was beginning to dip behind the trees as 16-year-old Layla Robinson walked home from basketball practice. Her muscles ached from the extra drills coach had made them run, but she felt good about how her jump shot was improving. The suburban streets were quiet, lined with maple trees just starting to show hints of fall colors. Layla adjusted her backpack and pulled out her water bottle, taking a long drink as she turned onto Oak Ridge Drive just 3 blocks from home. The police cruiser slowed beside her before she even noticed it. The window rolled down, revealing Officer Richard Dawson, a man Layla had seen around town but never spoken to. "Hey you, stop right there," Officer Dawson called out, his voice sharp enough to make Layla freeze mid-step. Layla stopped, her heart suddenly pounding despite knowing she had done nothing wrong. "Yes, sir?" she asked, keeping her voice steady the way her father had always taught her to do around police. Officer Dawson stepped out of his car, one hand resting on his holster. In the back seat, a German Shepherd barked loudly, making Layla take an instinctive step back. "We had a report of a shoplifting incident at the convenience store back on Main. The suspect matches your description," he said, looking her up and down in a way that made her uncomfortable. Layla blinked in confusion. "Sir, I've been at basketball practice since 3:30. I haven't been anywhere near Main Street today." "That's what they all say," Officer Dawson replied, taking a step closer. "Let me see some ID." "I'm 16, I don't have a driver's license yet," Layla explained, trying to keep her voice from shaking. "But I have my school ID in my backpack, and you can call my coach, he'll tell you I was at practice." As she slowly reached for her backpack, Officer Dawson tensed. "Keep your hands where I can see them." Layla raised her hands immediately. "I'm sorry. I was just going to get my school ID like you asked." A couple walking their dog on the other side of the street slowed down, watching the interaction with concerned expressions. The man pulled out his phone and seemed to be recording. "You people always have an excuse," Officer Dawson muttered, just loud enough for Layla to hear. The comment stung, making it clear what this was really about. "Officer, I didn't do anything wrong," Layla said, fighting to keep her voice calm despite the trembling that had started in her hands. "I'm just walking home from practice. My dad's a lawyer. Can I please call him? He can clear this up." Something in Officer Dawson's expression hardened at the mention of her father. "Put your hands behind your back now." "What? Why?" Panic rose in Layla's throat. "I didn't do anything." "That's resisting," Officer Dawson said, his hand moving to the door handle of his cruiser where the dog was now barking frantically. "Last warning. On the ground, hands behind your back." More people had stopped now. Mrs. Chen from the house on the corner had come outside, her phone also raised. Layla could feel tears welling in her eyes. "Please," she said, her voice cracking. "Just let me call my dad." She slowly reached for the phone in her pocket, and that's when everything went wrong. "She's reaching," Officer Dawson shouted, though it was clear to everyone watching that Layla was simply trying to get her phone. He yanked open the back door of his cruiser. "You had your chance." The German Shepherd leapt from the car, responding to Officer Dawson's command. "Get her!" Layla screamed as the dog charged, terror flooding her system. She turned to run but tripped over her own feet, falling hard onto the sidewalk. The dog was on her in seconds, teeth clamping down on her left arm as she tried to protect her face. The pain was blinding, white-hot and sharp. Layla's screams echoed down the peaceful suburban street as the dog tore at her arm and then her leg when she tried to kick it away. "Please, call him off," Mrs. Chen was shouting. "She's just a child." "Officer, stop this right now." The man with the dog yelled, still recording. She did nothing to warrant this. It felt like forever before Officer Dawson finally called the dog back, though it was probably only 30 seconds. By then, Layla's practice uniform was torn and bloody, her arm and calf sporting deep puncture wounds. "That'll teach you to reach for a weapon," Officer Dawson said, looking down at the sobbing teenager. "It was a phone," Layla managed through her tears, clutching her bleeding arm. "I was getting my phone." The gathering crowd had grown to nearly a dozen people, most with phones recording. Officer Dawson seemed to suddenly realize he had an audience. His demeanor shifted slightly. "Dispatch, I need an ambulance," he said into his radio. "Suspect injured during apprehension." "She's not a suspect, she's a victim," Mrs. Chen said, rushing forward with a clean kitchen towel she'd grabbed from her house. "Here, sweetheart, put pressure on it." Layla was going into shock, her body trembling uncontrollably as Mrs. Chen helped her apply pressure to the worst of the bites. The pain was overwhelming, making it hard to think. "What's your name, honey?" Mrs. Chen asked gently. Layla Robinson," she stammered through chattering teeth. "And your parents' number? We need to call them." Layla recited her father's number, which Mrs. Chen dialed immediately. On the other side of town, Anthony Robinson was reviewing case files in his office when his phone rang. As a civil rights attorney who had spent 20 years fighting for justice, he had received many disturbing calls. But nothing could have prepared him for Mrs. Chen's voice telling him his daughter had been attacked by a police dog. The world seemed to tilt on its axis as he grabbed his keys and ran for the door, telling his assistant to cancel all appointments. The 15-minute drive to Oak Ridge Drive was the longest of his life, every second stretching into eternity as he imagined his daughter hurt and afraid. By the time Anthony arrived, an ambulance was already there. Paramedics were tending to Layla, who lay pale and shaking on a stretcher. The sight of her torn, bloodied clothes and the obvious dog bites on her arm and leg made something primal rise in Anthony's chest. A father's rage and fear so powerful it nearly brought him to his knees. "Layla." He rushed to her side, gently taking her uninjured hand. "Daddy," she whispered, her voice small and broken. "He just let the dog attack me. I was just trying to get my phone." Anthony looked up, his eyes finding Officer Dawson standing a few feet away, looking irritated rather than concerned. The K9 was back in the cruiser as if nothing had happened. "Are you the one who did this to my daughter?" Anthony asked, his voice deadly quiet. "Sir, step back. This suspect was..." "Suspect?" Anthony's voice rose. "She's 16 years old and was walking home from basketball practice. What exactly do you suspect her of?" "We had a report of a shoplifting incident." She matched the description and reached for what could have been a weapon, Officer Dawson said, his chin lifting defensively. "She was reaching for her phone to call me," Anthony said, struggling to maintain his composure. "Did you even ask for her name before you set your dog on her?" Before Officer Dawson could answer, one of the bystanders stepped forward. "I have the whole thing on video," he said, holding up his phone. From the moment he stopped her, she did nothing threatening, and he made some comments. Racially charged comments. Before he released the dog, Anthony nodded gratefully to the man. "Please send that to me. I'm her father and an attorney." He handed the man his card, then turned back to the paramedics. "How bad is it?" "The bites are deep," the female paramedic said grimly. "She's going to need surgery to repair the damage to her arm. The dog hit an artery. She's lucky these folks were here to apply pressure right away." Anthony felt sick. He looked back at Officer Dawson, who was now speaking quietly into his radio, likely calling for backup. "I'm coming with her," Anthony told the paramedics, climbing into the ambulance beside his daughter. As they prepared to close the doors, he locked eyes with Officer Dawson. "This isn't over," he said, his voice calm but carrying an unmistakable promise. The doors closed and the ambulance pulled away, sirens wailing. In the back, Anthony held his daughter's hand as the paramedics worked to stabilize her. Layla's eyes were glazed with pain and shock. "It hurts, Dad," she whispered. "I know, baby. I know." He squeezed her hand gently. "But I'm here now, and I promise you, this will never happen to anyone else. Not after I'm done." As the ambulance raced toward the hospital, Anthony Robinson made a silent vow. Justice would come, not through violence or vengeance, but through something far more powerful and lasting. Something that would change not just one officer, but an entire system. Something that would shock everyone who thought they knew how these stories usually ended. The crowd that had witnessed the attack dispersed slowly, sharing videos and contact information, unaware that what they had just seen was only the beginning of a story that would eventually make national headlines. Not for its tragedy, but for what one father would do in response. The harsh fluorescent lights of the hospital waiting room made everything look sickly and unreal. Anthony Robinson sat with his head in his hands, his suit jacket discarded on the chair next to him, tie loosened around his neck. The clock on the wall showed it was just past 9 p.m. Layla had been in surgery for over 2 hours. His wife, Tanya, paced the small area, her tennis shoes squeaking on the polished floor. She'd rushed from her research lab at the university as soon as Anthony called, arriving at the hospital in record time. How could this happen? She asked for what must have been the 10th time. She was just walking home. The same route she takes every day. Anthony looked up at his wife, the circles under his eyes already darkening with exhaustion and worry. You know why it happened, he said quietly. Same reason I taught her to keep her hands visible around police. Same reason we had that talk with her when she was 8. Tanya stopped pacing, her shoulders dropping. But this is Westridge. We moved here because it was supposed to be different. It's never different, Anthony replied, his voice hollow. The zip code just changes how they hide it. A doctor in blue scrubs pushed through the double doors, looking tired but not grim. Anthony and Tanya both rushed toward her. Mr. and Mrs. Robinson? She asked. Yes, how is she? How's our daughter? Tanya asked, gripping her husband's arm. Layla is stable, the doctor said, and both parents let out a breath they'd been holding. The damage was extensive, but we were able to repair the artery and most of the muscle tissue in her arm. Her leg required fewer stitches, but both wounds will need careful monitoring for infection. Dog bites are particularly prone to complications. Will there be lasting damage? Anthony asked, dreading the answer. The doctor hesitated, which told Anthony everything before she even spoke. With physical therapy, we expect she'll regain most function in her arm. There will be scarring and she may not recover full strength or range of motion. Tanya let out a small, choked sound. Anthony pulled her close. When can we see her? He asked. She's in recovery now. Once she's moved to a room, the nurse will come get you. It should be about 30 minutes. As the doctor walked away, Anthony's phone buzzed. It was a text message with a video attachment from the man who had recorded the incident. A second text followed with contact information for Mrs. Chen and 3 other witnesses. They're already trying to spin it, Tanya said, looking over his shoulder at the phone. Her voice hardened. The police department just put out a statement. They're saying she matched a suspect description and became combative. Anthony's jaw tightened. Let them try. We have the video. Will that be enough? Tanya asked, her eyes meeting his. They both knew how these cases usually went. Before Anthony could answer, his phone rang. The caller ID showed it was Devin Walsh, his law partner and friend of 20 years. Anthony, I just saw the news. Tell me it's not Layla they're talking about. It's her, Dev. Anthony's voice cracked for the first time. That officer let his dog maul my baby girl for trying to call me. There was a string of muffled curses on the other end of the line. I'm coming to the hospital. And I'm bringing the team. Whatever you need, we're on it. By the time Layla was settled in a private room, the hallway outside was filled with people. Devin had arrived with 3 paralegals and their newest associate. Mrs. Chen had come with homemade soup and a blanket. The basketball coach and half the team huddled near the vending machines, still in their practice clothes. Even the hospital staff seemed moved by the show of support, bending visiting hours rules to accommodate everyone. Anthony and Tanya sat by Layla's bed, watching her sleep. The white bandages on her arm and leg stood out starkly against her brown skin. Her face, usually so animated and full of life, was still, the effects of pain medication and exhaustion pulling her into a deep sleep. Dad? Layla's voice was barely a whisper, her eyes fluttering open. I'm here, sweetheart, Anthony said, gently taking her uninjured hand. Mom's here too. Layla turned her head slightly, a small smile forming when she saw her mother. Then her eyes filled with tears. Why did he do that to me? I wasn't doing anything wrong. The question broke something in Anthony. It was the same question he'd heard from countless clients over the years. The same question that had driven him to become a civil rights attorney in the first place. But hearing it from his own child made it unbearable. I know, baby, he said, fighting to keep his voice steady. And we're going to make sure everyone else knows it too. A soft knock at the door interrupted them. A nurse poked her head in. Mr. Robinson? There are 2 police officers here. They say they need to take a statement from Layla. Anthony stood up, his expression hardening. No, not tonight. She's sedated and recovering from surgery. They're insisting, the nurse said apologetically. Then they can insist to me, Anthony replied, stepping out into the hallway and closing Layla's door behind him. 2 officers stood awkwardly amid the crowd of Layla's supporters. Neither was Officer Dawson, but Anthony recognized one as Lieutenant Fowler, the department's public information officer. Mr. Robinson, Lieutenant Fowler began, extending his hand. Anthony ignored it. My daughter is 16 years old and just underwent emergency surgery because your officer set his K9 on her for absolutely no reason. She will not be giving any statement tonight. We understand this is a difficult situation. No, you don't, Anthony cut him off. A difficult situation is being stuck in traffic when you're late for a meeting. This is an assault by a police officer on a minor. This is excessive force that could have killed my child. The second officer, a younger woman, shifted uncomfortably. Sir, we just need to complete our report. Your report can wait until my daughter has legal representation present, Anthony replied coldly. And as an attorney, I'm advising you that any further attempts to question her tonight will be seen as harassment of a victim. Lieutenant Fowler's expression tightened. Mr. Robinson, I understand you're upset, but I'd remind you that this is still an active investigation. Your daughter matched the description of a suspect in a crime. What crime? Anthony demanded. What was stolen? What store? What specific description other than a black teenager walking down the street? The officers exchanged looks. That's what I thought, Anthony continued. Now, unless you're here to tell me that Officer Dawson has been suspended and is under investigation for excessive force, we have nothing else to discuss. That decision isn't up to us, Lieutenant Fowler said. There are procedures. I know all about your procedures, Anthony interrupted again. I've spent 20 years fighting against how those procedures protect bad officers. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to leave this hospital and let my daughter recover. Tomorrow, my firm will file a formal complaint and request all body camera footage, dispatch recordings, and incident reports. We'll also be requesting Officer Dawson's complete personnel file, including all prior complaints. The crowd in the hallway had gone silent, watching the confrontation. Lieutenant Fowler straightened his shoulders. Those records are protected by police privacy laws. Not when there's evidence of a pattern of misconduct, they're not, Anthony replied. And I already have statements from 7 witnesses who heard Officer Dawson make racially charged comments before he released that dog. So you can make this easy, or you can make it hard. Either way, I will have those files. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then the female officer touched Lieutenant Fowler's arm. We'll come back at a better time, she said quietly. As they turned to leave, Anthony called after them. One more thing. Tell Chief Brooks I expect his call first thing in the morning. Not a statement through your office, not a press release. A direct call from him to me. When they were gone, Devon stepped forward, clapping a hand on Anthony's shoulder. You know they're going to circle the wagons. Let them try, Anthony said, his voice hard with determination. I've spent my whole career preparing for this moment without even knowing it. He looked around at the gathering of supporters. I'm going to need all of you. Your videos, your statements, everything you saw. Mrs. Chen stepped forward. Whatever you need. That officer has had trouble before. My nephew got stopped by him last year, same kind of thing. Nothing came of the complaint. Nods rippled through the crowd as others shared similar stories. Anthony listened, mentally cataloging each incident, each name. A pattern was emerging, one he could use. Back in Layla's room, Tanya had heard everything. She looked up as Anthony returned to their daughter's bedside. You're going to war with the entire department, aren't you? She asked softly. Anthony looked down at Layla, now sleeping peacefully again. The sight of those bandages, the thought of the scars she would carry for life, both physical and emotional, steeled his resolve. No, he said, his voice calm but filled with purpose. Not war. Something much more effective. As the night deepened, Anthony Robinson sat beside his daughter's hospital bed, his laptop open, fingers flying over the keyboard as he worked. While Layla slept and Tanya dozed in the chair opposite, he began building the foundation of something that would shake the entire police department to its core and ultimately change how justice was served in their community forever. What no one yet realized was that Anthony Robinson wasn't just fighting for his daughter. He was about to create a blueprint for accountability that would eventually spread far beyond their town, reaching places where similar injustices had gone unchallenged for generations. Outside the window, the night sky began to lighten with the first hints of dawn. A new day was coming, and with it the beginning of a different kind of justice. 3 days after the attack, Layla was finally allowed to go home. The house felt different now, quieter, more solemn. Friends and neighbors had filled their kitchen with home-cooked meals, their living room with flowers, but nothing could erase the weight that had settled over the Robinson family. Anthony helped Layla settle onto the couch, arranging pillows to support her injured arm. The doctors had warned them about the long road ahead, months of physical therapy, possible additional surgeries, and the psychological healing that might take even longer. How's the pain today? Anthony asked, sitting beside his daughter. Layla shrugged her good shoulder. Same. The pills make me fuzzy. Anthony nodded, noticing how she kept her gaze down, avoiding eye contact. His normally outgoing, confident daughter had become withdrawn since the attack. The physical wounds were just the beginning. The school counselor called, Tanya said, bringing in a tray with tea. She wants to set up some sessions for when you feel ready to return. I don't want to go back, Layla said quietly. Anthony and Tanya exchanged worried glances. You don't have to decide now, Anthony assured her. You take all the time you need. The doorbell rang, breaking the moment. Anthony went to answer it, finding Devin on the porch with a stack of folders and a determined expression. How is she? Devin asked, stepping inside. Physically? The doctors say she's healing well. Everything else. Anthony trailed off with a heavy sigh. They moved to the kitchen where Tanya had already set out coffee. She knew these late-night strategy sessions had become the new normal. What did Chief Brooks say? Devin asked, spreading files across the table. Anthony's expression darkened. He never called. Instead, I got this. He slid a formal letter across the table, a statement from their legal department expressing regret for the unfortunate incident and offering to cover Layla's medical expenses if we sign a non-disclosure agreement. Unbelievable, Devin muttered, scanning the letter. And Officer Dawson. 3-day administrative leave, then back on the job. They're calling it a procedural review, not even an actual investigation. Tanya, who had been listening from the doorway, stepped into the kitchen. They really think they can just sweep this under the rug? After what that man did to our daughter? It's what they've always done, Anthony said, his voice tired but resolute. The system is designed to protect itself. I've been fighting it for 20 years, one case at a time. But this... He looked toward the living room where Layla was resting. This time I'm going to break the whole damn system. Devin pulled out his laptop. I did some digging into Officer Dawson's record. It wasn't easy, they've buried most of it, but I found something interesting. The laptop screen showed a spreadsheet with dates, names, and brief descriptions of incidents. 15 complaints in 8 years, Devin explained. All of them involving excessive force against people of color. All of them dismissed after internal review. Anthony leaned forward, scanning the list. How did you get this? A small smile crossed Devin's face. Remember Zoe from the records department? The one whose housing discrimination case we won last year. Turns out she keeps very detailed personal notes. This is gold, Anthony said, his energy returning. But we need more. We need to talk to these people, build a pattern. Already on it, Devin replied. 3 have agreed to meet with us tomorrow. And that's not all. He pulled up another document. Officer Dawson was transferred here 4 years ago from the Riverside Department. Want to guess why? Another excessive force complaint, Anthony suggested. Bingo. But this one couldn't be buried because it happened at a public event with too many witnesses. Rather than fire him, they quietly moved him here. New department, clean slate. Anthony's phone buzzed with a text message. He checked it, his eyebrows rising. It's from Karen Winters, the city council member? Tanya asked. Anthony nodded. She wants to meet privately. The next morning, Anthony sat in a small coffee shop 3 towns over, where no one would recognize either him or Councilwoman Winters. She arrived precisely on time, dressed casually as if trying to blend in. Thank you for meeting me, she said, sliding into the booth across from him. How is your daughter? She's alive, Anthony replied simply, which is more than can be said for some victims of police violence. Karen Winters nodded, her expression grave. That's why I wanted to talk to you. Off the record, I'm listening. She glanced around before continuing in a lowered voice. The council isn't united on this. 3 of us, myself included, want a full external investigation and immediate suspension of Officer Dawson. The others are worried about the police union's reaction and potential budget implications. Budget implications, Anthony repeated flatly. My daughter will have scars for life, and they're worried about budget implications. I know how it sounds, Karen said, wincing. But you need to understand what you're up against. Chief Brooks has been building political capital for years. The mayor won't challenge him, not with an election coming up next year. So they're just going to let a dangerous officer keep patrolling our streets? Wait for him to hurt someone else's child? Karen leaned forward. That's why I'm here. I can help you, but I need something concrete. Something that even the chief's supporters can't ignore. Anthony studied her for a moment, weighing his options. What about the other complaints against Dawson? 15 and 8 years. I've never seen those records, Karen said, her surprise evident. They've never been presented to the council. Because they don't want you to see the pattern, Anthony explained. One incident can be dismissed as a misunderstanding. 15 shows a clear problem. Get me those records, legally, and I can force a council discussion that Brooks can't control. Later that afternoon, Anthony stood before Judge Luis Ortega in his chambers, alongside the city's attorney, George Patel. Mr. Robinson, while I sympathize with your situation, these personnel records are protected under the Police Privacy Act, Judge Ortega said, reviewing the motion Anthony had filed. Your Honor, I'm not asking for public disclosure at this stage, Anthony argued. I'm requesting these records for review in preparation of a civil rights case. The law clearly allows for discovery of relevant materials. Mr. Patel, the judge turned to the city attorney. The city's position is that a single incident, regrettable as it may be, does not justify a fishing expedition through an officer's entire personnel file. Patel said smoothly. Mr. Robinson is clearly looking to build a case after the fact. Anthony felt his temper rising but kept his voice measured. Your Honor, I have evidence that this was not a single incident. Officer Dawson has a history of similar complaints that have been systematically buried. The city is attempting to hide behind the Privacy Act to conceal a pattern of misconduct. Judge Ortega frowned. That's a serious allegation, Mr. Robinson. One I'm prepared to substantiate, Anthony replied, pulling out a folder. I have signed statements from 3 individuals who filed complaints against Officer Dawson in the past 2 years. None of these complaints resulted in disciplinary action or even proper investigation. The judge reviewed the statements, his expression growing more troubled with each page. Finally, he looked up at the city attorney. Mr. Patel, were you aware of these prior complaints? Patel shifted uncomfortably. I would need to consult with the department. I'll take that as a no, Judge Ortega said dryly. He turned back to Anthony. Mr. Robinson, I'm granting limited discovery of Officer Dawson's personnel file and all complaint records. These will be provided to the court for in-camera review within 48 hours. He fixed the city attorney with a stern look. All records, Mr. Patel. If I discover anything has been withheld, there will be sanctions. Outside the courthouse, Devin waited anxiously. How did it go? A small grim smile crossed Anthony's face. We got the records, but that's just the beginning. Over the next week, the Robinson house became command central. The dining room table disappeared under stacks of documents, laptops, and legal pads. Tanya took a leave of absence from the university to help coordinate, while Devin brought in 2 more attorneys from their firm. What they uncovered was worse than they had imagined. Not only had Officer Dawson accumulated complaints at an alarming rate, but the department's handling of those complaints showed a clear pattern of obstruction and cover-up. Internal investigators routinely dismissed eyewitness testimony, lost key evidence, and applied different standards depending on the race of the complainant. Look at this, Tanya said one evening, holding up a report. Last year, a white man filed a complaint about Officer Reynolds using profanity during a traffic stop. Full investigation, officer reprimanded. Same month, a black woman complained that Officer Dawson slammed her teenage son against a wall during a stop and frisk. Complaint dismissed for lack of evidence despite a hospital report showing bruising. Anthony nodded grimly. It's not just Dawson. It's systematic. Dad? Layla stood in the doorway, her injured arm still in a sling. It was the first time she'd shown interest in what they were doing. Hey, sweetheart, Anthony said, immediately giving her his full attention. How are you feeling? I saw the news, she said quietly. They're saying it was my fault, that I was resisting. Anthony's heart sank. Despite his efforts to shield Layla from the media coverage, it was inevitable she would see it eventually. They're wrong, he said firmly, and we're going to prove it. Layla moved closer to the table, looking at the scattered papers. All these people. Dawson hurt them too? Yes, Anthony admitted. But none of them had the resources or knowledge to fight back effectively. We do. Layla picked up one of the reports, her eyes scanning the details. What happens now? Anthony exchanged looks with Tanya and Devin. They had been so focused on building the case that they hadn't fully discussed the next steps with Layla. That depends partly on you, Anthony said gently. We can file a civil lawsuit against Officer Dawson and the department. That would mean depositions, possibly a trial where you'd have to testify. Layla was quiet for a long moment. Would it stop him from hurting someone else? It might, Anthony said honestly. But there's something else we could do. Something bigger. What's that? Anthony stood up and moved to a whiteboard they'd set up. On it was a complex flowchart he'd been developing for days. Instead of just going after Dawson, we use what happened to you to change the entire system, he explained. We push for an external review of the whole department, new accountability measures, community oversight. That sounds hard, Layla said. But there was a spark of interest in her eyes. It is, Anthony agreed. But if we succeed, it wouldn't just stop Dawson. It would protect everyone in this town from police who abuse their power. Layla studied the whiteboard for a long moment. Then she looked at her injured arm, her expression hardening with resolve. Let's do it. Let's change the system. For the first time since the attack, Anthony saw a glimpse of his daughter's spirit returning. The road ahead would be difficult and filled with obstacles. But seeing that spark in Layla's eyes renewed his determination. What the police department didn't understand yet was that they weren't just facing a grieving, angry father. They were facing a skilled attorney with 20 years of experience, a network of allies, and now, most importantly, a purpose that went beyond a single case. The system had hurt his daughter. Now Anthony Robinson was going to transform that system, piece by piece, until justice wasn't just a word, but a reality for everyone in their community. 2 months after the attack, Anthony Robinson stood before a packed city council meeting. The small municipal building had never seen such a crowd. People lined the walls, sat on the floor, and spilled out into the hallway. Local news cameras captured it all. Anthony straightened his tie and looked directly at the 7 council members seated at the raised table. Chief Brooks sat off to the side, his face a carefully controlled mask of professional neutrality. "Good evening," Anthony began, his voice steady. "My name is Anthony Robinson. On April 12th, my 16-year-old daughter Layla was walking home from basketball practice when Officer Richard Dawson stopped her without cause, made racist remarks, and then released his K9 to attack her when she reached for her phone to call me." Photographs appeared on the large screen behind him, clinical images of Layla's injuries before and after surgery. A collective gasp rippled through the room. "My daughter required emergency surgery. She will carry physical and emotional scars for the rest of her life. She still wakes up screaming, reliving the moment that dog was unleashed on her." Anthony paused, letting the images speak for themselves before continuing. "But I'm not here tonight to talk about just my daughter. I'm here because what happened to Layla is part of a pattern this council and this police department have ignored for years." He clicked to the next slide, showing a graph with steadily rising complaint numbers. In the past 5 years, complaints of excessive force by Westridge police officers have increased by 64%. Complaints from people of color have increased by 89%, and yet the number of these complaints resulting in disciplinary action remains at 0. Chief Brooks shifted in his seat, leaning over to whisper something to the mayor. "Officer Dawson alone has accumulated 15 formal complaints of excessive force and racial bias. All 15 were dismissed after what the department calls thorough investigation." Anthony clicked again, and the screen filled with faces, people of all ages who had filed complaints against Officer Dawson. These are not statistics. These are your constituents, your neighbors, people who turned to this council for protection and justice and who were ignored. The council chambers had fallen completely silent. Even the usual shuffling and whispering had stopped. For 20 years, I've represented victims of civil rights violations. I know how the system works, or rather, how it doesn't work. I've seen how complaints are buried, how officers like Dawson are protected, how the people they're sworn to serve are dismissed. Anthony looked directly at Chief Brooks. "This isn't about one bad apple. This is about a system designed to protect bad officers at the expense of the community's safety and trust." Councilwoman Winters spoke up. "Mr. Robinson, these are serious accusations. What exactly are you asking this council to do?" Anthony nodded as if he'd been waiting for exactly this question. He clicked to a new slide showing a detailed proposal. "I'm asking you to create an independent community oversight board with real power. Power to review complaints, access body camera footage, and recommend disciplinary action. I'm asking for mandatory de-escalation training and implicit bias education for all officers. I'm asking for transparency in the complaint process with regular public reporting of outcomes." He turned back to the council. "And I'm asking for the immediate suspension of Officer Dawson pending a proper external investigation of all complaints against him. Chief Brooks stood up abruptly. "This is outrageous. Mr. Robinson is using his personal situation to undermine the entire department. Our officers put their lives on the line every day. My daughter put her life on the line that day, too." Anthony interrupted, his voice still calm but carrying an edge now. "The difference is she didn't choose to. She was simply walking home from school." The mayor raised his hand for silence. "Chief Brooks, please. Mr. Robinson has the floor." Anthony continued. "I have submitted to this council complete documentation of 27 cases of excessive force by Westridge police officers in the past 3 years. These include sworn affidavits, medical records, and in several cases, video evidence the department claimed didn't exist." He gestured to the back of the room, where Devon stood with several large boxes. "Each council member will receive a complete file. I've also provided copies to the State Attorney General's office and the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division." A murmur swept through the crowd. Chief Brooks's face had gone from neutral to thunderous. "You're threatening this council," the police chief said, standing again. "No," Anthony replied evenly. "I'm informing this council of actions already taken. You've had years to address these issues internally. That time is over." For the next 2 hours, Anthony methodically presented case after case, each one revealing a pattern of misconduct and cover-up that extended far beyond Officer Dawson. People from the community came forward to share their experiences, stories many had kept quiet out of fear or hopelessness. Mrs. Chen described how her nephew had been roughed up during a traffic stop. An elderly man recounted being threatened with arrest for questioning why officers were searching his garage without a warrant. A high school teacher told how her students were routinely stopped and searched on their way home from school. When the public comment period ended, the council looked shell-shocked. The mayor cleared his throat. This is a lot to process. The council will need time to review these materials and consider the proposal." "With respect, Mayor Phillips," Anthony said, "the time for consideration was after the first complaint. Or the 5th. Or the 15th. My daughter was the 27th victim. How many more will there be while you're processing?" Councilwoman Winters spoke up. "I move that we create a special committee to draft an implementation plan for Mr. Robinson's Oversight Board proposal, to be presented at next month's meeting." "Second," another council member quickly added. The mayor looked to Chief Brooks, who sat stony-faced, then back to the council. "All in favor?" 4 hands went up. A majority. "Motion carries," the mayor said, sounding resigned. "Chief Brooks, regarding Officer Dawson." The police chief stood rigidly. "Department policy clearly states—" "I'm not asking about department policy," the mayor interrupted, uncharacteristically firm. "I'm telling you that Officer Dawson needs to be placed on administrative leave until this situation is resolved." As the meeting broke up, people surrounded Anthony, sharing stories, offering support, asking how they could help. Reporters pushed microphones toward him, calling for statements. Through the crowd, Anthony spotted Officer Dawson standing at the back of the room, his face twisted with anger. Their eyes met briefly before the officer turned and pushed his way out the door. Later that night, Anthony sat on their back porch with Tanya, both exhausted but too wired to sleep. "You did it," Tanya said, squeezing his hand. "You actually did it." Anthony shook his head. "It's just the beginning. They'll fight back. The department, the union, the officers who think Dawson is being sacrificed unfairly. But for the first time, they'll have to fight in the open," Tanya pointed out. "No more burying complaints, no more closed-door decisions." The sliding door opened and Layla stepped out, wrapped in a blanket despite the warm night. Her physical healing was progressing well, but the psychological wounds ran deeper. She still struggled with nightmares and anxiety, flinching at sudden movements and avoiding walks alone. "I watched it online," she said, sitting next to her father. "You were amazing." Anthony put his arm around her carefully, mindful of her still healing injuries. "We've got a long road ahead." "I want to help," Layla said. "I want to speak at the next meeting." Anthony and Tanya exchanged concerned glances. "Honey, are you sure?" Tanya asked gently. "It could be difficult having to relive what happened in front of all those people." Layla looked down at her arm, the scars still red and raw. "I relive it every night anyway. At least this way it might help change things." Anthony felt a complicated mix of pride and sadness. No parent wanted their child to have to fight such battles. But Layla's courage humbled him. "If you're sure, then we'll be right there with you," he promised. The next morning brought a flurry of media attention. Local stations ran segments on the council meeting, and even national news picked up the story. Anthony's phone buzzed constantly with calls from reporters, community members, and colleagues from across the country. But the most unexpected call came from Detective Lisa Huang of the West Ridge Police Department's Internal Affairs Division. "Mr. Robinson, I need to speak with you. In person, not at your home or office." Anthony agreed to meet her at a diner in the next town over. He found her already seated in a back booth, dressed in civilian clothes, nervously turning a coffee cup between her hands. "Thank you for coming," she said as he slid into the seat across from her. "What I'm about to tell you could end my career." "I understand," Anthony said. "Whatever you share will be protected." Detective Huang took a deep breath. "After your presentation last night, I went back and reviewed some files. Officer Dawson's personnel records have been altered. Official complaints have been removed, disciplinary notes have been deleted, and performance reviews have been rewritten." Anthony leaned forward. "How do you know?" "Because I keep my own records," she said, sliding a flash drive across the table. "I've been in internal affairs for 6 years. At first I thought the system worked, but then I started noticing patterns, complaints that disappeared, officers with multiple issues who somehow received glowing reviews. Why are you giving me this now?" Detective Huang met his gaze steadily. "Because of your daughter. Because when I saw those photos, I realized what we've been enabling. If Dawson had been properly disciplined after any of his previous complaints, Layla would never have been hurt." Anthony picked up the flash drive. "This could be the missing piece. Evidence of deliberate obstruction goes beyond negligence. It's criminal." "There's more," Detective Huang said, her voice lower now. "Chief Brooks doesn't just protect officers like Dawson. He actively recruited them. 5 officers in our department, including Dawson, were hired after being quietly pushed out of other departments for excessive force complaints." Anthony sat back, processing this revelation. "He's building a certain kind of police force." Detective Huang nodded grimly. "One that reflects his own values and biases. And he's been very careful about hiding the paper trail. Until now," Anthony said, pocketing the flash drive. As he walked back to his car, Anthony's phone rang again. It was Councilwoman Winters. "Anthony, something's happening. Chief Brooks called an emergency meeting with the mayor and city manager this morning. They've been behind closed doors for hours." "They're strategizing how to fight back," Anthony guessed. "I think it's worse than that," she replied. "I've heard rumors they're planning to discredit you. Dig up anything they can from your past, go after your law license. Maybe even look for ways to pressure Layla into changing her story." Anthony gripped the phone tighter. "Let them try. Just be careful. Brooks has friends in high places." As Anthony drove home, he thought about Detective Huang's flash drive in his pocket, the files waiting at his office, the community members coming forward with their stories. What had started as a father's quest for justice for his daughter had evolved into something much larger, a movement that threatened power structures built over decades. The system was finally being forced into the light, and systems like these, Anthony knew, fought hardest when they were cornered. But for the first time in 20 years of civil rights work, Anthony felt the momentum shifting. The truth was emerging, piece by damning piece. Now he just had to make sure it couldn't be buried again. The state attorney general's office was housed in an imposing granite building downtown. Anthony Robinson straightened his tie as he walked up the steps, the flash drive from Detective Huang secure in his pocket. Beside him walked Layla, her arm now out of the sling but still bearing the angry red scars of the dog attack. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Anthony asked his daughter one more time. "Once we go inside, there's no turning back." Layla looked up at the building, then back at her father. "I'm sure," she said, her voice stronger than it had been in months. "Let's go." The past week had been a whirlwind. After the city council meeting, Chief Brooks had launched a counteroffensive, holding a press conference where he accused Anthony of exploiting a regrettable incident for personal gain and undermining public safety with baseless attacks on dedicated officers. The police union had followed suit, releasing a statement supporting Officer Dawson and questioning Layla's account of the incident. Social media had exploded with arguments from both sides. with hashtags like Justice for Layla competing with Back the Blue. But Chief Brooks had underestimated both Anthony's determination and the community's growing frustration. Each attack only strengthened support for the Oversight Board proposal. And now, with Detective Huang's evidence in hand, they were taking the fight to a higher level. Inside, they were led to a conference room where State Attorney General Diane Powell waited with 2 assistant attorneys and an investigator. Powell, a no-nonsense woman with short gray hair and piercing eyes, got straight to the point. "Mr. Robinson, I've reviewed the materials you sent over. If they're authentic, they suggest a troubling pattern of misconduct and cover-up." "They're authentic," Anthony assured her. "And I have more." He placed the flash drive on the table. "This contains internal records showing deliberate alteration of personnel files to conceal complaints and protect officers with histories of excessive force." Powell raised an eyebrow. "That's a serious allegation. How did you obtain these records?" "From a source within the department who was concerned about what's been happening. They'll testify if given whistleblower protection." The Attorney General nodded thoughtfully, then turned her attention to Layla. "Miss Robinson, I understand you've agreed to give a statement about your experience." Layla nodded, her hands clasped tightly in her lap to hide their slight trembling. "Take your time," Powell said gently. "Start from the beginning." For the next hour, Layla recounted every detail of the attack: the initial stop, Officer Dawson's comments, the release of the dog, the pain, the hospital, the nightmares that followed. Her voice broke only once when describing how she still couldn't walk down her own street without panicking. Anthony watched his daughter with a mixture of heartbreak and fierce pride. The shy, withdrawn girl of the past months was gone. In her place sat a young woman determined to be heard. When Layla finished, the room was silent for a long moment. Even the hardened investigators looked shaken. "Thank you," Powell said finally. "That couldn't have been easy." She turned back to Anthony. "I'm opening a formal investigation into the Westridge Police Department effective immediately. We'll be looking at potential civil rights violations, obstruction of justice, evidence tampering, and abuse of power." Anthony felt a weight lift from his shoulders. "And Officer Dawson? Based on what I've heard today and the evidence you've provided, I'm requesting that the prosecutor's office review the case for possible criminal charges." As they left the building, reporters were waiting on the steps. News of the Attorney General's investigation had already leaked. Cameras flashed and questions flew at them from all directions. Anthony stepped up to the microphones, Layla at his side. "Today marks an important step toward accountability and justice, not just for my daughter, but for everyone who has suffered under a system that protects abusive officers instead of the public they're sworn to serve." He fielded a few questions, then felt Layla tug at his sleeve. To his surprise, she stepped forward to the microphones. "I want to say something," she said, her voice clear despite her nervousness. The reporters quieted down, cameras focusing on her face. "What happened to me was wrong," Layla began. "But it wasn't just about me or about one bad officer. It happens to people who look like me every day, and most don't have a dad who's a lawyer or neighbors with video cameras." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "I still have nightmares. I still jump when I hear dogs bark. But I'm not just a victim. I'm speaking out because things need to change. No one should have to be afraid of the people who are supposed to protect them." The trip home was quiet, both Anthony and Layla emotionally drained from the day's events. "You were incredible today," Anthony told his daughter as they pulled into their driveway. Layla gave a small smile. "I learned from you." Inside, they found Tanya in the kitchen with Devin and Councilwoman Winters, all clustered around a laptop. "You need to see this," Tanya said, her expression a mix of shock and satisfaction. She turned the laptop to show a breaking news story. Police Chief Thomas Brooks placed on administrative leave pending state investigation. "It's happening," Devin said, his voice filled with disbelief. "They actually did it." The mayor called an emergency session after the Attorney General contacted him, Councilwoman Winters explained. "Brooks is out, effective immediately. Deputy Chief Rivera is taking over temporarily." Anthony sank into a chair, the news hitting him like a physical force. After months of fighting, things were finally moving with breathtaking speed. His phone rang. "Detective Huang, have you seen the news?" She asked without preamble. "Just now. What's happening inside the department?" "Chaos," she replied. Internal Affairs has been ordered to turn over all files on excessive force complaints to the state investigators. Officers are being called in for interviews. And Dawson, what about him? Anthony asked, tensing. He's been suspended without pay pending criminal charges. The prosecutor's office is moving fast. As the days turned into weeks, the investigation expanded. What had started with Layla's case and Officer Dawson had grown to encompass the entire department's practices. More officers were suspended. More victims came forward. The media coverage spread from local to national outlets. The oversight board proposal that Anthony had presented to the city council was no longer just a suggestion. It was being implemented as a requirement from the state attorney general's office, with even stronger provisions than Anthony had originally proposed. 3 months after the attorney general's investigation began, Anthony stood at the podium in the same city council chamber where it had all started. The room was packed again, but the atmosphere was different, hopeful, expectant. Today we mark a new beginning for Westridge, Anthony said to the assembled crowd. The Community Police Accountability Board is officially in session, with full authority to review complaints, access body camera footage, and recommend disciplinary action. He looked out at the faces in the audience. Some were familiar, people who had shared their own stories of police misconduct. Others were new, drawn by the promise of change. In the front row sat Layla, her arm linked with her mother's. This board includes representatives from every neighborhood in our city, as well as experts in law enforcement, civil rights, and mental health. It will ensure that what happened to my daughter and so many others never happens again. Anthony stepped aside as Mayor Phillips approached the podium to introduce the board members. The first to be called was Layla Robinson. A murmur of surprise rippled through the crowd as Layla walked to the front of the room. At 17, she was by far the youngest member of the board. Ms. Robinson will serve as the youth representative, Mayor Phillips explained, ensuring that the voices and experiences of young people are included in our oversight process. Layla stood tall as she took her place with the other board members. The scars on her arm were still visible, but they no longer defined her. They were a reminder of what she had survived and what she was fighting to change. After the ceremony, as people mingled and congratulated the new board members, a reporter approached Anthony. Mr. Robinson, when this all started, many expected you to file a massive lawsuit against the city or seek Officer Dawson's imprisonment. Instead, you pushed for systemic reform. Why? Anthony looked across the room to where Layla stood, confidently speaking with a group of community activists. Lawsuits end with settlements. Prison sentences eventually finish. Neither fixes the underlying problems, he explained. What we've built here will outlast any single case or punishment. It changes the system itself. The reporter nodded. And Officer Dawson? He's facing criminal charges now. Justice isn't about revenge, Anthony said. It's about accountability and prevention. Dawson will face consequences for his actions, but more importantly, the system that protected him has been dismantled. Later that evening, the Robinson family sat on their back porch watching the sunset together. For the first time in months, there was a sense of peace about them. I got a call from Springfield today, Anthony said, referring to a city about 50 miles away. They want to implement our oversight model. Apparently, they've been having similar problems. Tanya squeezed his hand. It's spreading. Layla looked up from her phone. It's not just Springfield. There's a whole group online sharing our documents, using them as templates for their own cities. Anthony smiled, thinking of how far they'd come from that terrible day when Layla came home bloodied and traumatized. The journey had been painful, exhausting, and often frightening. There had been moments when it seemed hopeless, when the forces against them appeared too powerful to overcome. But they had persisted, step by methodical step. Not with violence or vengeance, but with truth, evidence, and an unwavering commitment to real change. What had started as a father's desperate quest for justice for his daughter had transformed into a movement that was spreading across the state, a blueprint for accountability that could be adapted and implemented anywhere. As darkness fell and stars appeared overhead, Anthony reflected on the words he had often told his clients over the years. True justice wasn't just about punishing wrongdoers, but about creating systems that prevented harm in the first place. Layla had become not just a survivor, but a leader in that effort. Her scars would always tell the story of what had happened to her. but they would also remind everyone of what could be accomplished when people refused to accept injustice as inevitable. And that, Anthony thought as he looked at his family, was the most powerful form of justice of all,